In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, a wealthy man, Mr. Thornhill, is found dead. Everyone says it's his heart, but Miss Marple knows better. A misplaced teacup, a bitter smell, a hidden letter, and a mysterious car spark her suspicions. As family secrets unravel and whispers of blackmail surface, Miss Marple's sharp eyes uncover a chilling truth. It's murder, and the killer is closer than anyone thinks. Can one tiny clue change everything? Dive into a classic mystery where nothing stays hidden for long. Chapter 1. The Quiet Village St. Mary Mead was the kind of place where nothing much happened, or so it seemed. Tucked away in the green folds of the English countryside, the village was a cozy patchwork of thatched cottages, winding lanes, and gardens bursting with roses. The church steeple poked above the rooftops, and the little shop at the corner sold everything from stamps to sweets. People nodded to each other on the way to the post office, and the air carried the soft hum of daily life, teacups clinking, children laughing, and the occasional bark of a dog. But beneath the calm, St. Mary Mead had a knack for secrets, and no one knew this better than Miss Jane Marple. Miss Marple lived in a neat little house called Dame Mead, its white walls half hidden by climbing ivy. At 70-something, she was a small, delicate woman with snowy hair tucked under a lace cap and eyes that sparkled with quiet mischief. She loved her garden, her knitting, and most of all, watching people. To the villagers, she was just a sweet old lady who liked a good chat. But those who knew her better, like the vicar or her nephew, Raymond West, understood that Miss Marple's mind was sharper than a knitting needle. She saw things others missed, tiny things like a glance that lingered too long or a word spoken out of turn. And right now, as she snipped dead roses from her garden, she was thinking about the biggest news in St. Mary Mead, the death of Mr. Reginald. Thornhill. Thornhill Manor sat on the edge of the village, a grand old house with tall chimneys and windows that gleamed like watchful eyes. Mr. Thornhill, a wealthy businessman who'd made his fortune in London, had moved there 5 years ago. He was a big man with a loud voice, always dressed in fine suits, his gray mustache bristling as he barked orders to his staff. The villagers didn't much like him. He was too proud, they said, too quick to remind everyone of his money. They couldn't deny he brought a certain buzz to St. Mary Mead. His parties were grand affairs, with music spilling from the manor and cars lined up along the drive. Now, though the manor was silent, Mr. Thornhill had been found dead in his study 3 days ago, slumped over his desk. The doctor said it was his heart, weak from years of rich food and stress. Natural causes, they all agreed. But Miss Marple wasn't so sure. She paused her gardening, her shears hovering over a wilted bloom, and glanced toward the lane. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, was hurrying past, her face flushed with excitement. "Morning, Miss Marple," she called. Barely. "Slowing down? Off to the shop, such a to-do about poor Mr. Thornhill?" Miss Marple smiled politely. "Good morning, Mrs. Price. Quite a shock, wasn't it?" "Oh, dreadful." Mrs. Price stopped, clutching her basket. Found him just like that. They did all alone in that big study. Heart gave out, Dr. Haydock says. But I heard from Mrs. Baxter, she's his housekeeper. You know that he was in a right state the night before. Shouting at someone, she said, though she wouldn't say who. Really? Miss Marple's voice was soft, but her eyes sharpened. Oh, curious. Mrs. Price leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. And young Billy, the gardener's boy, swears he saw a strange car by the manor that night. Not one of Mr. Thornhill's fancy ones, mind you. Something old and rattly. But you know how boys are, always making things up. Miss Marple nodded, tucking the tidbit away. Boys do have lively imaginations. Thank you, Mrs. Price. As the postmistress bustled off, Miss Marple returned to her roses, her mind turning like the pages of a book. A strange car, shouting match. These were the kinds of threads she loved to pull, the ones that unraveled the neat stitches of a story. She didn't think Mr. Thornhill's death was as simple as the doctor claimed. People's hearts didn't just give out, not without a push. Sometimes, and St. Mary Mead, for all its sleepy charm, had a way of hiding sharp edges. By noon, Miss Marple had finished her gardening and settled into her favorite armchair by the window, a cup of tea steaming beside her. Her parlor was cozy, with chintz, curtains, and a mantel full of photographs. Her nephew Raymond, her old friend Dolly Bantry, and a faded picture of her parents. She picked up her knitting, the needles clicking softly, but her eyes were on the lane outside. People passed by Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, pushing a prom. Mr. Pye, the baker, whistling as he carried a tray of loaves. And then, someone new, a young woman in a smart green coat, her dark hair pinned neatly under a hat. She walked quickly, her head down, as if she didn't want to be noticed. Miss Marple recognized her at once. Clara Thornhill. Mr. Thornhill's daughter Clara was in her late 20s, tall and elegant, with the kind of beauty that turned heads. She'd come to St. Mary Mead now and then, usually for her father's parties. But she lived in London, where she ran a small art gallery. The villagers whispered that she was ambitious, maybe too much so, always chasing her father's approval and his money. Miss Marple watched as Clara hurried toward the manor, her steps sharp and purposeful. Something about her posture stiff, almost angry, caught Miss Marple's eye. Grief, perhaps. Or something else. The doorbell tinkled, pulling Miss Marple from her thoughts. It was Mrs. Bantry, her friend from Chipping Cleghorn, bustling in with a basket of apples. "Jane, you'll never guess what I heard," she said, plopping into a chair. "They're saying Mr. Thornhill left a fortune, and it's all going to that daughter of his." "Clara, but there's talk of a will and well. You know how people are. Some say his nephew Henry was counting on that money." Miss Marple poured her friend a cup of tea. "Henry Thornhill, the young man who works in the city." "That's the one," Mrs. Bantry said, taking a sip. "He's a broker or some such, always in a hurry. Bit of a temper, they say. He was at the manor last week, and Mrs. Baxter told me he and his uncle had a proper row. Something about investments gone wrong." Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily. "A row, you say? How interesting. And there's more." Mrs. Bantry's eyes gleamed. "Mrs. Baxter herself was in a state when I saw her at the shop. Kept dropping things, looking over her shoulder. You'd think she'd seen a ghost. She's been with Thornhill for years, loyal as anything, but now she's jumpy as a cat." Dale. Miss Marple nodded, her mind filing away each detail. Mrs. Baxter, the housekeeper, was a sturdy woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled into a tight bun and a habit of keeping the manor spotless. If she was nervous, there was a reason. People didn't change their ways without cause, not in Miss Marple's experience. She thought of the strange car Billy had mentioned and the shouting Mrs. Price had heard. Pieces of a puzzle, scattered. And small, but puzzles always came together if you looked closely enough. The afternoon passed quietly. Miss Marple took a walk to the village shop, partly to stretch her legs, partly to listen. The shop was a hub of gossip, and today it was buzzing. Mrs. Weatherby, the butcher's wife, was there, buying sugar and talking loudly about Thornhill's death. "Such a shame," she said, but no surprise really. That man ate like a king roast. Beef every night. No wonder his heart gave out. Miss Marple smiled politely, picking up a tin of biscuits. "Did he have many visitors before he passed?" she asked, her tone light. Mrs. Weatherby shrugged. "Not that I saw. But young Billy, he's always poking about, said he saw Mr. Langley's car near the manor that night. Do you know that old rival of Thornhill's runs a shop in Much Benham?" Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. Mr. Langley was a name she hadn't heard in a while. He and Thornhill had been partners once, years ago, until a falling out over money. Langley now ran a hardware shop, but the bad blood lingered. A rival's car at the manor was worth noting. Back at Mead, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting forgotten. She thought of Clara's hurried steps, Henry's row with his uncle, Mrs. Baxter's nerves, and that mysterious car. Dr. Haydock's report said natural causes, but Miss Marple had seen too many natural deaths that weren't. She remembered a case in St. Mary Mead years ago when old Mrs. Finch died in her sleep, or so they thought, till Miss Marple noticed a glass of milk left on the wrong table. Small things, always the small things, as the sun dipped below the hills. Casting long shadows over the village, Miss Marple made up her mind. Tomorrow she'd pay a visit to Thornhill Manor. She'd bring a basket of scones, perhaps, and have a chat with Mrs. Baxter. Housekeepers saw everything, even if they didn't know it. And somewhere in that grand, silent house there was a clue, a tiny, hidden thing that would change everything. She picked up her knitting again, the needles clicking like a clock ticking down to the truth. St. Mary Mead might look quiet, but Miss Marple knew better. The village was awake, whispering its secrets, and she was listening. Chapter 2. The suspicious teacup. The morning sun peeked through the lace curtains of Dame Mead, painting soft patches of light on Miss Marple's parlor floor. She sat at her small breakfast table, a pot of tea steaming beside a plate of toast and jam. Her knitting lay neatly folded in its basket, but her mind was far from idle. She was thinking about Thornhill Manor, Mr. Reginald Thornhill's sudden death, and the whispers she'd heard in the village yesterday, Mrs. Price's tale of shouting, Billy's strange car, and Mrs. Bantry's gossip about a family row. St. Mary Mead was buzzing, and Miss Marple knew that buzz meant something was amiss. Today, she'd visit the manor herself. A basket of scones would be her excuse, but her real purpose was to listen, watch, and find the thread that would unravel the mystery. She wrapped 6 fresh scones in a cloth, tucked them into a wicker basket, and pulled on her best gray coat and hat. The walk to Thornhill Manor was pleasant, the air crisp with the scent of dew and freshly cut grass. The village was waking up. Children scampered toward the schoolhouse, and Mr. Pye, the baker, waved from his shop door. Miss Marple nodded back, her eyes scanning the lane for anything out of place. She passed the post office, where Mrs. Price was sorting letters, and the church, where the vicar was polishing the brass bell. Everything seemed ordinary, but Miss Marple knew ordinary was often a mask. Thornhill Manor loomed at the end of the lane, stone walls grand but cold. Ivy clung to the chimneys, and the tall windows stared down like unblinking eyes. Miss Marple climbed the steps and rang the bell, its chime echoing inside. The door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Baxter, the housekeeper. She was a stout woman, with gray hair pulled tight and a face that looked tired, her eyes darting nervously. Miss Marple, she said, forcing a smile. What a surprise. Good morning, Mrs. Baxter, Miss Marple said brightly, holding up her basket. I thought some scones might cheer the house. Such a sad time with Mr. Thornhill gone. Mrs. Baxter's smile faltered. Very kind of you. Come in, please. She stepped aside, and Miss Marple entered the grand hall. The manor smelled of polished wood and old money, a wide staircase curving up to the second floor and portraits glaring from the walls. Mrs. Baxter led her to a small sitting room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. I'll fetch some tea, the housekeeper said, hurrying off. Miss Marple settled into a plush chair, her eyes roaming. The room was tidy, with velvet curtains and a gleaming mahogany table, but something felt off. On a sideboard, among a clutter of china cups and a silver teapot, sat a single teacup, plain, white, and out of place. It wasn't with the others, which were stacked neatly, but alone near the edge, as if someone had set it down in a hurry. Miss Marple's fingers itched to pick it up, but she waited, her mind turning. A misplaced teacup might mean nothing or everything. Mrs. Baxter returned with a tray, setting it on the table. You've caught us at a bad time, she said. Pouring tea, her hand shook slightly, and a drop spilled. Miss Clara's here, sorting her father's things, and Mr. Henry's coming later. It's all such a muddle, I can imagine, Miss Marple said gently. Losing Mr. Thornhill so suddenly must be hard. I heard he was unwell the night before. Mrs. Baxter's eyes flicked up, then down. He was always shouting about something business, mostly. He was in his study, working late. I found him next morning, gone. Her voice cracked, and she busied herself with the teapot. Miss Marple sipped her tea, watching. You must see everything in a house like this. Did he have many visitors that night? Not that I saw, Mrs. Baxter said quickly. Too quickly, Miss Marple thought. It's just the usual Miss Clara, sometimes Mr. Henry, no one else. Stood abruptly. I'll fetch Miss Clara. She wanted to thank you for the scones. As Mrs. Baxter left, Miss Marple rose and crossed to the sideboard. The teacup was ordinary, no cracks or stains, but its position nagged at her. A house as neat as this, why was it out of place? She leaned closer, noting a faint smudge on the handle like a thumbprint. Her heart quickened. Small things, she reminded herself. Always the small things. Footsteps announced Clara Thornhill's arrival. She swept in her green coat replaced by a black dress that spoke of mourning, but didn't quite suit her sharp, confident air. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice cool. "How kind of you to visit." "My condolences, my dear," Miss Marple said. "Your father was such a presence in the village." Clara's lips tightened. "Yes, he was. If you'll excuse me, I have papers to sort." She turned to leave, then paused. "Mrs. Baxter will see you out." Miss Marple nodded, but her eyes lingered on Clara. The young woman's hands were clenched, her posture stiff. Grief or guilt? Miss Marple couldn't tell yet. As Mrs. Baxter returned, Miss Marple said, "I mustn't keep you." "But might I use the powder room before I go?" "Of course," Mrs. Baxter said, pointing down a hall. "Second door on." The left, the powder room, was an excuse. Miss Marple wanted a glimpse of the study where Mr. Thornhill had died. She slipped down the hall, passing the first door, then the second. The third door was slightly ajar, and through the gap she saw a large desk, papers scattered across it, and bookshelves lining the walls. This was the study. She pushed the door open, her heart thudding. The desk held an inkpot, a pen, and a glass of water, untouched. A faint smell lingered, something bitter, almost medicinal. Miss Marple's nose wrinkled. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the desk, the chair, the floor. Nothing obvious, but that smell wasn't right. Voices in the hall made her freeze. Mrs. Baxter was talking to someone, a man, his tone low and urgent. Miss Marple slipped back into the hall, closing the study door softly, and made her way to the powder room. She splashed water on her hands, her mind racing. That smell, that teacup, Mrs. Baxter's nerves. They were pieces of a puzzle, and she was starting to see the edges. Back in the sitting room, Mrs. Baxter handed her the basket, now empty. "Miss Clara took the scones upstairs," she said, avoiding Miss Marple's eyes. "Thank you again," Miss Marple smiled. "My pleasure." "Do take care, Mrs. Baxter." The walk back to Dane Mead was slow, giving Miss Marple time to think. Grade. We want. Cobra by am right. Well, Jeff Rundy grad abiving. Gotta get it. We're getting gotta grada ganel guy. Gotta kai. Teacup was the key. In a house run by someone as meticulous as Mrs. Baxter, a misplaced cup was no accident. Had someone used it, then set it aside in a hurry? And that smell in the study, what was it? Years ago, in another case, bitter almonds, perhaps, or something close. Poison. Her mind whispered, but she pushed the thought down, too soon to jump to conclusions. At home, she found a note slipped under her door. It was from Billy, the gardener's boy, scrawled in childish handwriting. "Miss M saw that car again last night? Old, black, parked by the manor. Didn't tell no one but you." Miss Marple folded the note, her lips pursing. Billy was a good boy, not prone to fibs. If he'd seen the car twice, it mattered. She sat by her fire, knitting in hand, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She pictured the teacup, the smudge on its handle, the bitter smell in the study. Then she thought of Clara's coldness, Mrs. Baxter's shaking hands, and the car Billy kept seeing. And Henry, where was he in all this? Mrs. Bantry had mentioned a row, and rows often left traces. It's like ripples in a pond. The village clock struck 3, and Miss Marple decided to visit Dr. Haydock. He'd certified Mr. Thornhill's death, and she wanted his thoughts. She found him at his surgery, small building near the church. Dr. Haydock was a gruff man with kind eyes, his desk piled with papers. "Miss Marple," he greeted, "come to check on my health or someone else's?" "Just a question about poor Mr. Thornhill." You're sure it was his heart? Dr. Haydock frowned. No doubt about it. Found him at his desk. No signs of a struggle. Man was in his 60s. Ate like a horse. Never exercised. No surprise. Did you notice anything odd? A smell, perhaps, in the room? He shook his head. Nothing but dust and old books. Why do you ask? I'm just curious, she said, smiling. But her mind was firm. Dr. Haydock was a good doctor, but he didn't look for what he wasn't expecting. She thanked him and left, her suspicions growing. Back at Dane Mead, she made a call to her nephew Raymond in London. He was a writer with connections in the city. Raymond, dear, she said, could you find out about Mr. Reginald Thornhill's business? Any trouble, perhaps, with a man named Langley? Raymond chuckled. Aunt Jane, are you sleuthing again? Only asking questions, she said. Will you help? Of course, he said. I'll ring you tomorrow. As night fell, St. Mary Mead grew quiet, but Miss Marple's mind was loud with questions. The teacup, the smell, the car, the road, they were all connected. She was sure someone in that manor knew more than they were saying. Tomorrow, she'd watch and listen closer. The truth was there, hidden in the small things, waiting for her to find it. Chapter 3. The family's secrets. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary Mead, curling around the rooftops like a soft gray scarf. Miss Marple stood at her kitchen window watching the village wake up. A milk cart rattled by, and a flock of sparrows scattered from her garden. Her mind, though, was on Thornhill Manor, on that misplaced teacup, the bitter smell in the study, and the nervous twitch in Mrs. Baxter's hands. Yesterday's visit had stirred her suspicions, and today she meant to tug at the threads she'd found. Families, she knew, were like old quilts. Lovely on the surface, but pull at a loose stitch, and secrets spilled out. The Thornhill family was no different. She buttered a slice of toast and sipped her tea, planning her day. Mrs. Bantry had invited her to tea at Gossington Hall, and Miss Marple knew it would be a chance to hear more village talk. But first, she wanted to see Clara Thornhill again and perhaps meet Henry, the nephew with the temper. She also needed to learn more about Mr. Langley. The old rival Billy's note had tied to that mysterious car. Miss Marple finished her breakfast, tucked her knitting into a bag, and set out for the village shop. Gossip, she'd learned long ago, was as good as a map for finding hidden paths. The shop was busy, with Mrs. Weatherby behind the counter, weighing sugar for a customer. Miss Marple picked up a tin of biscuits and lingered, listening as villagers chattered. Mrs. Price, the postmistress, was there, her basket overflowing. It's a shame about Mr. Thornhill, she was saying to Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife. But that Clara, she's already talking about selling the manor. Hardly cold her father, and she's counting his money? Mrs. Clement shook her. Head grief takes people differently, I suppose. But I saw Henry Thornhill this morning, driving into the village. Looked cross as anything. Miss Marple's ears pricked up. Good morning, ladies, she said, stepping closer. Did I hear you mention Henry Thornhill? Mrs. Price turned, eager to share. Oh yes, Miss Marple. We're staying at the manor now, helping Clara sort things. But they don't get on. Those two. Mrs. Baxter told me they were snapping at each other yesterday. Something about the will. Really? Miss Marple's voice was mild, but her mind was sharp. Families do get tense at such times. Mrs. Weatherby leaned over the counter. Tense? I'd say downright nasty. Billy heard them shouting when he was trimming the hedges. Said Henry was yelling about being cheated. Miss Marple nodded, filing the detail away. She paid for her biscuits and stepped outside, her thoughts swirling. Clara and Henry arguing over the will, Mrs. Baxter's nerves, that teacup out of Pleasant was all starting to form a pattern, like stitches in her knitting. She decided to visit the manor again, this time with a jar of her homemade jam as an excuse. The walk to Thornhill Manor was brisk, the mist lifting to reveal a pale blue sky. The manor's gates were open, and a sleek black car was parked in. The drive Henry's, no doubt. Miss Marple rang the bell, and Mrs. Baxter opened the door, looking even more frazzled than yesterday. Her apron was crooked, and a strand of gray hair escaped her bun. Miss Marple, she said, startled. You're kind to visit again. I brought some jam, Miss Marple said, holding up the jar. I thought it might brighten the day. Baxter managed a thin smile. That's thoughtful. Come in, I'll put the kettle on. The sitting room was the same, with its velvet curtains and crackling fire, but the teacup on the sideboard was gone. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Had Mrs. Baxter moved it? Or someone else? She sat down, her hands folded neatly, and watched as Mrs. Baxter fussed with the tea tray. Is Miss Clara about? She asked. She's upstairs, Mrs. Baxter said, her voice tight, and Mr. Henry's in the study. They're going through Mr. Thornhill's papers. It's a lot of work, you see, of course, Miss Marple said. It must be hard, keeping the house running at a time like this. Mrs. Baxter's hands froze on the teapot. It is. Mr. Thornhill was particular everything had to be just so. I've been with him 10 years, and now, her voice trailed off, and she looked away. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. Must have known him well. Would he seem himself before he passed? No worries, perhaps, about business? Mrs. Baxter hesitated, then shook her head. He was always fretting about business. Letters, phone calls, late nights, but he didn't share that with me. I just kept the house, before Miss Marple could. Press further. Clara appeared in the doorway, her black dress crisp and her dark hair pinned tightly. Miss Marple, she said, her tone polite but cool. You're becoming a regular visitor. Hope I'm not intruding, Miss Marple said. I only wanted to offer my condolences again. Clara's lips twitched, not quite a smile. Thank you. It's a difficult time. Father left. Complications, Miss Marple tilted her head. His business, I suppose. I heard he was successful, but success brings its own troubles. Clara's eyes flickered. He had his share, but we'll manage. She turned as footsteps approached, heavy and quick. A young man entered Henry Thornhill, Miss Marple guessed. He was in his 30s, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw, and dark hair slicked back. His suit was expensive but rumpled, and his face was flushed with irritation. Who's this? He asked, glancing at Miss Marple. Miss Marple, from the village, Clara said. She brought jam. Henry snorted. Jam, just what we need. He turned to Clara. Those papers aren't adding up, Clara. We need to talk. Not now, Clara snapped, then softened her tone. Miss Marple, thank you for coming. Mrs. Baxter will show you out. Miss Marple rose, her eyes catching Henry's clenched fists and Clara's tight smile. As Mrs. Baxter led her to the door, she heard raised voices from the sitting room, Clara's sharp, Henry's loud. She couldn't make out the words, but the anger was clear. At the door, she paused. Mrs. Baxter, she said softly, that teacup on the sideboard yesterday, it was such a pretty one. Is it part of a set? Mrs. Baxter blinked, caught off guard. Oh, that. Just an old cup. I must have misplaced it when cleaning. It's put away now. Miss Marple smiled. Of course, these things happen. But as she walked down the manor steps, she knew better. That teacup hadn't been misplaced by accident. Someone had used it, and someone didn't want it noticed. Back in the village, Miss Marple headed to Gossington Hall for tea with Mrs. Bantry. The hall was a sprawling house, less grand than Thornhill Manor but warmer, with roses climbing the walls and a messy charm. Mrs. Bantry greeted her at the door, her cheeks pink with excitement. Jane, you're just in time. I've got news. They settled in the drawing room, where a tray of sandwiches and cakes waited. Mrs. Bantry poured tea, her words tumbling out. I saw Mr. Langley in Much Benham yesterday, at his shop. He was in a foul mood, muttering about Thornhill, said something about an old debt never paid. And then get this, Mrs. Baxter was there, buying nails of all things. Nails? What does a housekeeper need nails for? Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. Nails. How odd. Did she say anything about the manor? Not a word, Mrs. Bantry said, but she looked like she hadn't slept in days, kept glancing around like someone was watching. Miss Marple sipped her tea, thinking of Mrs. Baxter's shaking hands and the missing teacup. And Mr. Langley, she said, he and Mr. Thornhill were rivals, weren't they? Yes, Mrs. Bantry said. Years ago, they were partners. In some business importing, I think. But Thornhill cheated Langley, or so Langley says. They haven't spoken in ages, but now Langley's car's been seen near the manor. Billy swears it. Miss Marple nodded. Billy's note about the black car was looking more important. She remembered a case in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a grocer's delivery boy had seen a bicycle that didn't belong. It had cracked the case wide open. Boys like Billy noticed things adults missed. As she walked home, her phone rang. It was Raymond, her nephew, calling from London. "Aunt Jane," he said, "I looked into Thornhill's business. He was rich, all right, but he'd made enemies. Langley's name came up, something about a deal gone sour 10 years ago. Thornhill bankrupted Langley's company, and Langley never recovered. Also, there's talk Thornhill was in debt to some shady types in London. I'll dig deeper if you want." "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple said. "That's very helpful." At Danemead, she sat by her fire, knitting in hand. The teacup, the bitter smell, Mrs. Baxter's nerves, Clara's coldness, Henry's anger, Langley's grudge, they were all pieces of a puzzle, and the picture was getting clearer. She thought of Clara and Henry fighting over the will, and Mrs. Baxter buying nails for no clear reason, and that car. Why was it at the manor? She recalled a story her friend Dolly once told, about a housekeeper who'd hidden a letter in a teacup to keep it safe. Could Mrs. Baxter be hiding something too? The village clock struck 6, and Miss Marple set her knitting down. Tomorrow she'd talk to Billy, find out more about that car. She'd also visit Dr. Haydock again, ask about that bitter smell. Poison, she thought, though she didn't say it aloud. The teacup was the key, she was sure of it. Someone had used it, and someone wanted it forgotten. In St. Mary Mead, secrets never stayed buried for long, not when Miss Marple was watching. Chapter 4. The hidden past. The morning in St. Mary Mead was bright, with sunlight spilling over the cottages and making the dew on the grass sparkle like tiny jewels. Miss Jane Marple sat at her kitchen table, cup of tea cooling beside her as she reread Billy's note about the black car near Thornhill Manor. Her mind was busy, stitching together the clues from the past few days: the misplaced teacup, the bitter smell in the study, Mrs. Baxter's nervous hands, Clara's coldness, Henry's anger, and now Mr. Langley's old grudge. Each was a thread in a tangled web, and Miss Marple was determined to find where they crossed. Today, she'd dig deeper into the Thornhill family's past, starting with a visit to young Billy and a trip to Much Benham to learn more about Mr. Langley. She pulled on her coat, tucked her knitting into her bag, and stepped out into the crisp air. The village was lively. Children laughed on their way to school, and Mr. Pye waved from his bakery, the smell of fresh bread drifting out. Miss Marple smiled back, but kept walking, her eyes sharp for anything out of place. At the edge of the village, she found Billy, the gardener's boy, weeding a flower bed near the church. He was a lanky lad of 12, with freckles and a mop of brown hair, his hands muddy from work. "Good morning, Billy," Miss Marple said, her voice warm. "I got your note about the car. Can you tell me more?" Billy looked up, wiping his brow. "Morning, Miss Marple. Yeah, I saw it again, old black car, rusty, parked by the manor's back gate 2 nights ago. Same one I saw the night Mr. Thornhill died. Looked sneaky, like it didn't want to be seen." Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the detail. "Did you see the driver?" "Nah," Billy said, digging at a weed too dark. "But it's not one of Mr. Thornhill's fancy cars. It's more like something Mr. Langley drives. It's got a shop in Much Benham." "Thank you, Billy," she said, slipping him a shilling. "You're a sharp boy. Let me know if you see that car again." Billy grinned, pocketing the coin. "Will do, Miss Marple." Mersh. Her next stop was the post office, where Mrs. Price was, sorting letters. Miss Marple bought a few stamps and leaned in, her tone casual. "Mrs. Price, do you know much about Mr. Langley and Much Benham? Heard he and Mr. Thornhill were partners once?" Mrs. Price's eyes lit up, eager for a chat. "Oh, yes. Years ago, they ran a business together, importing furniture, I think. Made a fortune, but then they fell out. Langley said Thornhill cheated him, took all the profits. He's been bitter ever since. Runs that hardware shop now. Not a friendly sort, mind you." Miss Marple nodded. How sad. Business can bring out the worst in people. As she left the post office, her thoughts turned to the manor. Clara and Henry were there, sorting papers, and Mrs. Baxter was hiding something. Miss Marple was sure of it. That teacup moved so quickly after she'd noticed it was no accident, and the bitter smell in the study she couldn't shake the memory of a case years ago when a similar smell had pointed to poison. She decided to visit Much Benham to see Mr. Langley's shop for herself. A bus ride would do, and it would give her time to think. The bus to Much Benham was a rickety thing, rattling along the country lanes. Miss Marple sat by the window, watching fields roll by, her mind piecing together the puzzle. Langley's grudge, Billy's car, the family's arguments, they all circled around Thornhill's death. At Much Benham, she stepped off into a bustling market square, where shops lined the cobblestone streets. Hardware was easy to find, its sign faded, but clear. The shop was small, crammed with tools, nails, and paint cans, and behind the counter stood Mr. Langley, a thin man with gray hair and a sour expression. "Good morning," Miss Marple said, picking up a small hammer as if browsing. "I'm from St. Mary Mead, looking for a few things for my garden." Langley grunted, barely looking up. "What do you need?" "Oh, just odds and ends," she said, her eyes scanning the shop. A pile of old ledgers sat in a corner, dusty and forgotten. "You've been here a long time, haven't you? I heard you knew Mr. Thornhill." Langley's face darkened. "Knew him? I wished I didn't. Cheated me out of my share, he did, 10 years back. Left me with nothing but this shop." Miss Marple's voice was gentle. "That must have been hard. Suppose you hadn't seen him lately." "Not in years," Langley snapped, but his eyes shifted. "Why do you ask?" "No reason," she said lightly. "Just village talk. Such a pity about his death." Langley muttered something and turned away, busying himself with a box of screws. Miss Marple bought a packet of nails she didn't need and left, her mind buzzing. Langley's bitterness was real, and his quick denial felt off. Had he been at the manor that night? Billy's car suggested he might have been back in St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple stopped by the vicarage to drop off her nails as a gift for the vicar's shed repairs. Mrs. Clement was there, attending her roses. "Miss Marple," she called, "have you heard? They found a letter at the manor, an old one, hidden in Mr. Thornhill's desk." Clara was in a state about it, wouldn't say why. Miss Marple's heart quickened. A letter. How interesting. "Did Mrs. Baxter mention it?" "No, it was the maid, Jenny," Mrs. Clement said. "She's a chatty thing. Said it was in a locked drawer, addressed to someone called E. Clara and Henry were arguing over it this morning." "Thank you, Mrs. Clement," Miss Marple said, her mind racing. "Oh." A letter, hidden away, and a fight over it's another piece of the puzzle. She hurried home, eager to call Raymond for any updates on Thornhill's business. At Danemead, she dialed his number, her fingers tapping the table. "Aunt Jane," Raymond answered, his voice cheerful. "I've got more on Thornhill. He was in deep with some London investors, shady ones. Rumor is he owed them money and they weren't happy. Also, that deal with Langley. It wasn't just a split. Thornhill forged papers to cut Langley out. There's talk of a lawsuit that never happened because Langley couldn't afford it." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "Fascinating, dear. And anything about a letter, perhaps, from Thornhill's past?" "Nothing specific," Raymond said, "but I'll ask around. You're onto something, aren't you? Just curious," she said, smiling. "Thank you, Raymond." As evening settled over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sat by her fire, knitting forgotten. The letter was a new clue, and it tied to the family's tension. Was E a person, a code, or something else? She thought of Clara's sharp tone, Henry's anger, and Mrs. Baxter's nerves. And Langley's bitterness was too raw to ignore. She recalled a case in her youth when a hidden letter had revealed a blackmail scheme. If Thornhill had been hiding something similar? She decided to visit the manor again tomorrow, perhaps to speak with Jenny, the maid. Servants saw things, heard things, and Jenny's chatter might hold the key. The teacup, the bitter smell, the car, and now the letter. They were all linked, she was sure. The smell nagged at her most. Bitter almonds, she'd thought, but it wasn't quite that. Something medicinal, perhaps, like a drug gone wrong. She made a note to ask Dr. Haydock about it tomorrow. The village clock struck 7. And Miss Marple lit a lamp, her parlor glowing softly. She pictured Thornhill's study, the desk, the papers, the glass of water. Had the letter been in that locked drawer all along? And why was Clara so upset about it? Families, she knew, kept their secrets close, but secrets had a way of slipping out. Like that teacup left on the sideboard, it was a small thing, but it screamed of carelessness or fear. She picked up her knitting, the needles clicking like a clock ticking toward the truth. St. Mary Mead was quiet tonight, but Miss Marple felt the stirrings of something darker. The past was catching up with Thornhill Manor, and she was ready to meet it. Chapter 5. The village gathering. The sun hung high over St. Mary Mead, casting a warm glow on the village's neat cottages and blooming gardens. Miss Jane Marple stood in her parlor, adjusting her hat in the mirror. Day was the vicarage tea party, a yearly event where the whole village gathered to chat, eat cake, and share gossip. It was the perfect place to watch people, and Miss Marple knew that watching was as good as asking questions, sometimes better. Her mind was full of the clues she'd gathered: the misplaced teacup, the bitter smell in Thornhill's study, Mrs. Baxter's nerves, Clara's coldness, Henry's anger, Mr. Langley's grudge, and the mysterious letter addressed to E. Each was a piece of a puzzle, and the tea party would give her a chance to see how they fit. She picked up a basket with a homemade lemon drizzle cake, her contribution to the party, and stepped out into the bright afternoon. The lane was busy, with villagers heading to the vicarage. Children skipped ahead, and Mrs. Price waved, her basket stuffed with scones. Miss Marple smiled back, but her eyes were sharp, scanning for familiar faces from Thornhill Manor. She hoped to spot Clara, Henry, or even Mrs. Baxter. People let their guards down at tea parties, and a slip of the tongue could reveal more than a locked drawer. The vicarage garden was a cheerful sight, with tables covered in white cloths and plates piled high with sandwiches, biscuits, and cakes. A big teapot steamed at the center, and Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, bustled about, greeting everyone. Miss Marple found a seat near the rose bushes, where she could see the whole garden. She poured herself a cup of tea and nibbled a sandwich, her ears open to the chatter around her. Mrs. Bantry arrived, her face bright with excitement. "Jane, you're here," she said, settling beside her. "The village is buzzing about Thornhill. They say Clara's already hired a lawyer to sort the will, and Henry's furious, thinks he's been cut out." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. "Really? That's quite a hurry for Clara." "Oh, yes," Mrs. Bantry said, lowering her voice. "And I heard from Jenny, the maid, that the letter they found, it's gone missing." Clara was in a rage, blaming Mrs. Baxter for misplacing it. Miss Marple's fingers tightened on her teacup. A missing letter was no small thing, especially one that caused such a fuss. "Did Jenny say anything else about it?" she asked. "Only that it was old, with faded ink," Mrs. Bantry said, addressed to E, "but no one knows who that is. Could be a woman, a business partner, or even a code." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning. A letter that upset Clara enough to vanish. Had someone taken it on purpose? She thought of Mrs. Baxter's nervous hands and the teacup that had disappeared from the sideboard. Small things, she reminded herself, always told the biggest stories. Across the garden, she spotted Clara Thornhill, standing stiffly by a table. Her black dress looked out of place among the bright hats and summer frocks, and her face was pale, her eyes darting. She was talking to Mr. Pye, the baker, but her answers were short, her smile forced. Miss Marple watched her closely. Clara's confidence seemed shaken, and that wasn't like her. Was it the letter, the will, or something else? Then Henry Thornhill arrived, striding into the garden with a scowl. His suit was sharp, but his tie was loose and his hands were stuffed in his pockets. He ignored Clara and headed straight for the tea table, grabbing a cake and eating it in one bite. Miss Marple noticed how the villagers gave him space there, whispers following him. "That's Henry," Mrs. Bantry muttered, always in a mood. "I heard he lost a fortune in some bad deal, and he was counting on his uncle's money to fix it." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. The desperate man was a dangerous one. She remembered a case in St. Mary Mead years ago when a young man's debts had led to a theft and worse. Henry's anger could be more than just a temper. As the party went on, Miss Marple sipped her tea, listening to the chatter. Mrs. Price was telling Mrs. Weatherby about a delivery to the manor box of medicine. For Mr. Thornhill, sent just before he died. "Heart pills, I think," Mrs. Price said. "Dr. Haydock ordered them, but they arrived late. Never opened. Poor man. Miss Marple's heart skipped. Medicine. That bitter smell in the study, could it be tied to those pills? She made a mental note to ask Dr. Haydock about them. She glanced around and saw Mrs. Baxter at the edge of the garden. Her apron swapped for a plain dress, but her face was still pinched with worry. She was talking to Jenny, the maid, a young girl with curly hair and a habit of giggling. Hey, Miss Marple. Edged closer, pretending to admire the roses. Mrs. Baxter, you look tired, Jenny was saying, her voice loud. All that cleaning after the police left? Is that teacup you were fussing over? Why'd you move it so quick? Mrs. Baxter's face went white. Hush, Jenny. It was just clutter. I put it in the kitchen. Miss Marple's ears pricked. Up. So the teacup was in the kitchen now. Jenny's comment was innocent, but Mrs. Baxter's reaction wasn't. Why was she so jumpy about a simple cup? Miss Marple recalled a case where a servant had hidden poison in a teapot to cover a crime. Could Mrs. Baxter be hiding something similar? She moved back to her table, her mind racing. The teacup, the letter, the medicine, they were all connected, she was sure. She watched as Clara approached Henry, her voice low but sharp. We need to talk about the papers, she said. Tonight. Henry glared at her. You're not? Cutting me out, Clara? I know what he promised. Clara's eyes flashed. Keep your voice down. This isn't the place. Miss Marple pretended to fuss with her cake, but she caught every word. The will was clearly a sore point, and that missing letter might hold the key to why. She thought of the smudge on the teacup's handle, a thumbprint, perhaps left by someone careless or rushed, and that bitter smell. It was nagging at her, like a word she couldn't quite recall. The party began to wind down, villagers drifting home and children chasing each other through the grass. Miss Marple helped Mrs. Clement clear the tables. Using the chance to ask about Jenny, such a lively girl, she said. She must hear all sorts of things at the manor. Mrs. Clement laughed. Oh, Jenny's a chatterbox. She told me Clara was crying over that letter yesterday, locked in her room. Said it was personal, not business. Strange, don't you think? It's very strange, Miss Marple agreed, her mind filing the detail away. A personal letter, then, not about money, but something deeper. She thanked Mrs. Clement and headed home. The lemon drizzle cake gone, and her basket empty. At Dane Mead she found a note from Billy, slipped under her door. Miss M. saw that car again last night, same black one, near the manor's back gate. Looked like Mr. Langley was driving. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Langley's car, circling the manor again. He was tied to this, somehow his old grudge perhaps, or something more recent. She sat by her fire, knitting in hand, and thought, through the day, Clara's nerves, Henry's anger, Mrs. Baxter's fear, Jenny's chatter, and Billy's car, they were all pieces of the same puzzle. The teacup was the center. She felt it. That smudge, that bitter smell, it pointed to something deliberate, not a heart attack. She remembered a case in her youth where a single cup had held traces of arsenic, overlooked by everyone but her. Could this be the same? Her phone rang, breaking her thoughts. It was Raymond, her nephew, with more news. Aunt Jane, I found something about that letter, he said. A friend in London says Thornhill had a secret partner years ago, someone, only known as E. No one knows who it was. Could be a lover, a friend, or even a blackmailer. Thornhill kept it quiet, but it caused trouble with his family. Miss Marple's eyes sparkled. Q, dear. That's very helpful. As night fell, St. Mary Mead grew quiet, the stars bright above the cottages. Miss Marple set her knitting down and made a plan. Tomorrow, she'd visit Dr. Haydock to ask about the medicine and that bitter smell. She'd also try to talk to Jenny, who might let slip more about the letter. The teacup was the key, she was certain now. Someone had used it perhaps to deliver something deadly and then tried to hide it. The letter, the car, the family's secrets, they all pointed to a truth buried in Thornhill Manor, and Miss Marple was getting closer to digging it up. Chapter 6. The breakthrough, the morning light crept softly into St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of gold and pink. Miss Jane Marple sat at her breakfast table, a cup of tea steaming beside a slice of toast. Her knitting lay untouched, her mind too busy with the puzzle of Thornhill Manor, the misplaced teacup. The bitter smell in the study, Mrs. Baxter's nervous fidgeting, Clara's coldness, Henry's anger, Mr. Langley's grudge, and the mysterious letter to E. They were all threads in a tangled web. Yesterday's tea party had added more, Clara's distress over the missing letter, Henry's fury about the will, and Mrs. Baxter's odd reaction to Jenny's mention of the teacup. Miss Marple was certain the teacup held the key, and today she meant to prove it. She finished her tea, pulled on her coat, and tucked a small notebook into her bag. Her first stop would be Dr. Haydock's surgery to ask about the bitter smell in Mr. Thornhill's medicine. Then she'd find a way to check on that teacup, perhaps by visiting the manor again. She stepped out into the crisp air, the village, quiet except for the chirp of birds and the distant clatter of a milk cart. As she passed the post office, Mrs. Price waved, but Miss Marple's focus was elsewhere. The teacup smudge a thumbprint, she'd thought nagged at her. It wasn't. Just carelessness. It was a clue someone wanted hidden. Dr. Haydock's surgery was a small brick building near the church, its waiting room empty this early. The doctor greeted her with a gruff smile. "Miss Marple, you're up early. Checking on my patients again?" She smiled back, her eyes twinkling. "Just a question, doctor." "About Mr. Thornhill's death you mentioned heart failure, but did you notice a smell in the study? Something bitter, perhaps like medicine." Dr. Haydock frowned, rubbing his chin. "A smell. Can't say I did." The room was stuffy, but nothing stood out. "Why?" "Oh, just something I noticed," she said lightly. "In his medicine, Mrs. Price mentioned heart pills that arrived late. Were they anything unusual?" "Standard stuff," Dr. Haydock said. "Digitalis for his heart. Strong dose. Mind you, can be dangerous if misused." "But the box was unopened when we found him." Miss Marple's heart skipped. Digitalis. She'd read about its overdoses could be fatal. Some forms had a bitter smell. "Could digitalis leave a scent in a room?" she asked. He shrugged. "If spilled, maybe. But I saw no sign of that." "You're fishing, aren't you?" "Only curious," she said, thanking him and leaving. Her mind buzzed. Digitalis could explain the smell, and the teacup could have carried it. But how to prove it? She needed that cup. Her next stop was Thornhill Manor. She carried a jar of her rosehip jelly as an excuse, knowing Mrs. Baxter couldn't refuse another gift. The manor's gates were open, and the black car Henry's, she assumed, was still. In the drive, she rang the bell, and Jenny, the maid, answered, her curly hair bouncing. "Miss Marple," she said, grinning. "More treats." "Just a little jelly," Miss Marple said, stepping inside. "Is Mrs. Baxter about?" Jenny nodded, leading her to the sitting room. "She's in the kitchen washing up," Miss Clara. "And Mr. Henry are upstairs, arguing again." "Never stop. Those two." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes darting to the sideboard. The teacup was still gone, as she'd expected. "Jenny dear, you mentioned a teacup the other day at the tea party." Mrs. Baxter seemed fussy about it. "Was it special?" Jenny giggled, then glanced around. "Not really, just an old cup, plain white. She was cross I mentioned it. Said it was hers, from her own set, not the manor's. Odd, though she never uses her own things here." "Yes." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Mrs. Baxter's own teacup in the manor's sitting room. That was no accident. "Thank you, Jenny," she said. "But I use the powder room." "Shh." Jenny pointed down the hall, and Miss Marple moved quickly, her steps soft. She passed the powder room and slipped into the kitchen, where Mrs. Baxter was scrubbing dishes. The teacup sat on a shelf, apart from the others, its plain white surface gleaming. Miss Marple's heart raced. She needed to test it, but taking it outright would raise suspicion. She heard footsteps and hurried back to the hall, just as Mrs. Baxter appeared. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Baxter said, startled. "I didn't hear you. I was just admiring your kitchen," Miss Marple said smoothly. "So tidy? That teacup on the shelf fits lovely. May I see it?" Mrs. Baxter's face paled. "It's nothing special. It's just an old one I use." She grabbed the cup and tucked it into a cupboard, her hand shaking. Miss Marple smiled, but her mind was firm. Mrs. Baxter was hiding something. "Thank you for the jelly," Mrs. Baxter said, ushering her out. Must get back to work. As Miss Marple left, she spotted Clara and Henry in the drive, their voices low but tense. You can't keep it from me, Henry was saying. Letter changes everything. Clara's eyes flashed. It's none of your business, Henry. Let it go. Miss Marple walked on, pretending not to hear, but the words stuck with her. The letter to E was still causing trouble, and now it was missing. She needed to test that teacup, and she knew just the person to help her old friend Mr. Stringer, a chemist in Much Benham who owed her a favor from a case years ago. Back at Dane Mead, she called Mr. Stringer, keeping her voice light. Mr. Stringer, I have a small favor. Could you test a china cup for any unusual substances? I'll bring it to you tomorrow. Of course, Miss Marple, he said, chuckling. Still solving mysteries, eh? She laughed softly, just curious. Now came the tricky part, getting the teacup. She couldn't steal it, but Jenny's chatter gave her an idea. The maid was careless with gossip. Perhaps she'd be careless with the cup. Miss Marple wrote a note to Jenny, asking her to drop by Dane Mead with that pretty teacup Mrs. Baxter mentioned, for a recipe she wanted to share. Which a flimsy excuse, but Jenny was young and trusting. By afternoon, Jenny arrived, the teacup wrapped in a cloth. Mrs. Baxter didn't mind, she said, handing it over. Said it's just an old thing. Miss Marple thanked her, her fingers tingling as she held the cup. The smudge was still there, faint but clear. She wrapped it carefully and caught the evening bus to Much Benham, delivering it to Mr. Stringer's small lab. Test for anything unusual, she said. A medicine, perhaps like digitalis. Mr. Stringer raised an eyebrow but nodded. I'll call you tomorrow with results. Back home, Miss Marple sat by her fire, her knitting idle. The teacup was the breakthrough. She felt it in her bones. It held traces of digitalis. It could prove Mr. Thornhill's death wasn't natural. She thought of the study, reconstructing. The night he died. He'd been working late, Mrs. Baxter had said, shouting at someone. Had that someone brought him tea in that cup, laced with poison? In the letter to E, was it a motive, a secret Thornhill had kept too long? Her phone rang, startling her. It was Raymond, her nephew, with more news. Aunt Jane. I dug deeper into Thornhill's past. That he might be Elizabeth, his old secretary. She left suddenly 10 years ago, after the Langley deal fell apart. Rumor is, Thornhill was blackmailing her over something personal, a love affair? Maybe. No one's seen her since? Miss Marple's eyes sparkled. Thank you, dear. That's very helpful. She set the phone down, her mind racing. Elizabeth. A blackmail scheme could explain the letter. Mrs. Baxter knew her. It might explain her nerves. Miss Marple recalled a case where a servant had been forced to act against her will, caught in a web of someone else's secrets. Was Mrs. Baxter protecting someone or herself? The next morning, Mr. Stringer called. Miss Marple, you were right. The teacup had traces of digitalis, too much to be accidental. Someone used it to deliver a dose, I'd wager. Miss Marple's heart leaped. Thank you, Mr. Stringer. Can you keep this quiet? Of course, he said. Good luck. She hung up, her thoughts clear. The teacup proved murder. Someone had poisoned Mr. Thornhill, and Mrs. Baxter's rush to hide the cup pointed to her or someone she was shielding. Clara's distress over the letter, Henry's anger, Langley's car, they all fit, but the picture wasn't complete. She needed to know more about that letter and who he was. Miss Marple decided to visit the manor one last time before confronting anyone. She'd return the teacup, claiming Jenny had left it by mistake, and watch Mrs. Baxter's reaction. She also wanted to talk to Clara about the letter. Families, she knew, held their secrets tight, but a nudge could loosen them. As she prepared to leave, Billy knocked on her door, his face flushed. Miss Marple, that car was back last night. Mr. Langley's, I'm sure, parked by the Manors. Gate then drove off quick. Thank you, Billy, she said, slipping him another shilling. Langley's presence was no coincidence. Was he tied to the poison, the letter, or both? At the manor, Mrs. Baxter took the teacup with a forced smile, her hands trembling. Silly Jenny, she muttered, always leaving things about. Miss Marple nodded, watching closely. It's a lovely cup. You said it was yours? Yes, Mrs. Baxter said. Too fast. Just an old thing. Clara appeared, her face drawn. Miss Marple? You're here again? Just returning something. Miss Marple said. I heard about a letter you found. It must be hard, sorting through such personal things. Clara stiffened. It's nothing, just old papers. Miss Marple smiled, but her eyes were sharp. The pieces were falling into place. The teacup proved poison, the letter held a secret. And Langley's car tied it all together. Tomorrow, she'd bring everyone to the manor. Clara, Henry, Mrs. Baxter, and maybe even Langley. The truth was close, hidden in the small things, and Miss Marple was ready to shine a light on it. Chapter 7. The confrontation in the evening sky over St. Mary Mead was a deep velvet blue, dotted with stars that twinkled like secrets waiting to be told. Miss Jane Marple sat in her cozy parlor at Dane Mead, the fire casting a warm glow on her snowy hair. Her knitting lay idle, her mind sharp as a needle. The clues had come together, the teacup with traces of digitalis, the bitter smell in Mr. Thornhill's study, Mrs. Baxter's nervous hands, Clara's distress over the missing letter, Henry's anger, Mr. Langley's lurking car, and the mysterious E. Miss Marple was certain now Mr. Thornhill's death was no heart attack. It was murder, and the teacup was the key that unlocked the truth. Tonight, she would gather everyone at Thornhill Manor to unravel the mystery and expose the killer. She picked up her phone and called Mrs. Bantry, her voice calm but firm. Dolly, could you arrange for Clara, Henry, and Mrs. Baxter to be at the manor this evening? Say it's for a small gathering to honor Mr. Thornhill, and if you see Mr. Langley and Much Benham, invite him too. I'll explain later. Voice crackled with excitement. Jane, you've got something, haven't you? I'll do it. Next, Miss Marple called Dr. Haydock, asking him to join for a matter of importance. She needed his medical knowledge to confirm her suspicions. Finally, she rang the vicar, Mr. Clement, to lend a sense of calm to the gathering. By 7 o'clock she was ready, her gray coat buttoned, and her basket empty. No scones or jelly this time. Just her notebook and a quiet determination. Thornhill Manor loomed in the dusk, its windows glowing like eyes watching the village. Miss Marple climbed the steps, her heart steady despite the weight of what lay ahead. Mrs. Baxter opened the door, her face pale and her apron twisted in her hands. Miss Marple, she said, her voice shaky. Mrs. Bantry said it's a memorial. A sort, Miss Marple said, stepping inside. The sitting room was set with chairs in a circle, a fire crackling in the hearth. Clara was there, her black dress crisp, but her eyes tired. Henry slouched in a corner, his tie loose and his face sour. Mr. Langley stood by the window, his thin frame tense, his eyes darting. Dr. Haydock and Mr. Clement arrived soon after. Their presence adding a touch of authority. Mrs. Bantry bustled in last, her cheeks pink with curiosity. Thank you all for coming, Miss Marple said, her voice soft but clear. We're here to remember Mr. Thornhill, but also to clear up some questions about his death. Small things, you see, can tell big stories. Frowned. What's this about Miss Marple? The doctor said it was his heart. Dr. Haydock nodded. That's right. No sign of anything else. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Doctors are thorough, but they don't always look for what's hidden. Mrs. Baxter, you moved to plain white. Teacup from the sideboard after I noticed it. Why was it so important? Mrs. Baxter's hands trembled. It was just clutter. I tidied it away. But it wasn't the manners, Miss Marple said gently. Jenny said it was yours, from your own set. Odd, don't you think, to use your personal cup in Mr. Thornhill's house? Jenny, hovering by the door, gasped. I didn't mean to. It's all right, Jenny, Miss Marple said. You helped more than you know. That teacup had traces of digitalis, a heart medicine Mr. Thornhill took. Too much digitalis can kill. And I believe someone used that cup to give him a fatal dose. The room went still. Clara's eyes widened, and Henry sat up, his fists clenched. Mr. Langley muttered something, his face dark. Mrs. Baxter gripped her apron, her breath quick. Dr. Haydock leaned forward. Digitalis? The pills were unopened. Miss Marple? I checked. Not. The pills, she said. The poison was in the tea, delivered in that cup. I had it tested in much venom. The bitter smell I noticed in the study, it was digitalis spilled or mixed poorly. Someone gave Mr. Thornhill a deadly dose the night he died. Clara stood, her voice sharp. This is ridiculous. Miss Marple's gaze moved to Henry. You were angry, Mr. Henry? About the will? You thought your uncle cheated you, didn't you? Mrs. Price heard you arguing with him that night. Henry's face reddened. I was mad, sure. He promised me a share, then changed his mind. But I didn't kill him. Miss Marple nodded, then turned to Mr. Langley. And you, Mr. Langley. Billy saw your car near the manor the night Mr. Thornhill died. You blamed him for ruining your business years ago. A strong motive, perhaps? Langley's eyes narrowed. I was in the village, yes, but not at the manor. I wanted to confront him, but I didn't. He was already dead when I got there. Miss Marple's voice stayed calm. Then there's the letter, addressed to E. Clara. You were upset when it was found, and now it's missing. Why, Clara's lips tightened. It was personal. Father's old business, nothing more. Not quite, Miss Marple said. My nephew Raymond found that E was Elizabeth, your father's secretary, years ago. He was blackmailing her over a love affair, wasn't he? A secret that could ruin her. And you, Mrs. Baxter, you knew Elizabeth, didn't you? Mrs. Baxter gasped, her hands flying to her face. How did you? Because you were her friend, Miss Marple said softly. We worked for Mr. Thornhill back then, too. When I saw how nervous you were, how quick you hid that teacup, I wondered. The letter was from Elizabeth, begging you to help her escape his threats. You kept it hidden, but when Clara found it, you panicked. Mrs. Baxter's eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean to. I just wanted him to stop. The room was silent, all eyes on the housekeeper. Miss Marple stepped closer, her voice kind but firm. You gave him the tea, didn't you? Laced with digitalis from his own medicine. You knew his habits. Knew he'd drink it late at night. You used your own teacup to avoid suspicion, but you forgot to put it away. Mrs. Baxter sobbed, sinking into a chair. He was cruel. Elizabeth was my sister, my only family. Lapped him. Her 4 years threatening to tell everyone about her affair. She ran away, but he kept the letter, kept controlling us. I couldn't let him hurt her anymore, Clara gasped. Mrs. Baxter, you killed father. He stood, his voice shaking. You let us fight over his money, knowing it was you. Mrs. Baxter's voice broke. I didn't want anyone to know. I thought it would look like his heart. I'm sorry. Mrs. Baxter, you must tell the police. It's the right thing. Dr. Haydock nodded. I'll call Inspector Craddock. He'll handle it. Miss Marple watched as Mrs. Baxter nodded, tears streaming down her face. The room was heavy with shock, but also relief. The truth was out, like a knot finally untied. Mr. Langley muttered, I didn't know, and Clara sank into a chair, her face pale. Henry stormed out, slamming the door. Mrs. Bantry touched Miss Marple's arm. Jane, how did you know? Miss Marple smiled faintly. Small things, Dolly. A teacup out of place. A smell that didn't belong. People are careless when they're desperate. As Dr. Haydock called the police, Miss Marple slipped into the hall, her work done. The teacup had told its story, and the letter had filled in the rest. Mrs. Baxter's confession explained that Carl Langley had been there, but only to argue, not to kill. Elizabeth's secret had driven a sister to murder, and now justice would take its course. Outside, the night air was cool, stars bright above St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple walked home, her steps slow but steady. The manor's lights faded behind her, and the village seemed to breathe easier. Tomorrow, she'd return to her knitting, her garden, and her quiet life. But tonight she'd solved another mystery, proving once again that in St. Mary Mead nothing stayed hidden for long. Chapter 8. The village restored, the morning sun rose gently over St. Mary Mead. bathing the village in a soft golden light. The cottages glowed, their gardens bursting with roses and daisies, and the air carried the sweet scent of freshly baked bread from Mr. Pye's bakery. The church bell chimed softly, calling the faithful to Sunday service, and children laughed as they ran along the lanes. To anyone passing through, St. Mary Mead was a picture of peace, a quiet corner of England untouched by trouble. But Miss Jane Marple, sitting in her cozy parlor at Dane Mead, knew better. Peace, in a village like this, was hard-won and last. Night's confrontation at Thornhill Manor had proven it. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her snowy hair tucked neatly under a lace cap, her knitting resting in a basket by her armchair. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow on the photograph's lining. Her mantle, her nephew Raymond, her friend Dolly Bantry, and her parents in their faded frame. Her mind, though, was on the events of the previous evening. Mrs. Baxter's tearful confession. The teacup laced with digitalis, the letter to E that revealed a blackmail scheme. And the truth about Mr. Thornhill's murder. It had been a long night, but justice had been served, and the village could breathe again. She thought back to the confrontation, replaying each moment. The teacup had been the key, just as she'd suspected, a plain white cup. Out of place on the manor's sideboard, smudge of a thumbprint betraying a careless act. Mrs. Baxter's admission had tied it all together. She'd used her own cup to deliver the poisoned tea. Driven by years of pain over her sister Elizabeth's suffering, Mr. Thornhill's blackmail, hidden in that letter to E, had pushed her to the edge. Clara's distress, Henry's anger, Mr. Langley's lurking car had all been distractions, but Miss Marple had seen through them. Focusing on the small things that told the biggest story, a knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Mrs. Bantry, her face bright with excitement, a basket of apples in her arms. "Jane, you're the talk of the village," she said, bustling in and plopping into a chair. "Mrs. Baxter? A murderer? I still can't believe it. How did you know?" Miss Marple poured her friend a cup of tea, her smile faint but warm. "It was the teacup, Dolly. It didn't belong. And Mrs. Baxter was too quick to hide it. People give themselves away in the little things, a cup left out, a nervous glance. You just have to watch." Mrs. Bantry shook her head, amazed. And that letter. To think Mr. Thornhill was blackmailing poor Elizabeth all those years. No wonder Mrs. Baxter snapped. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes thoughtful. Families keep secrets, but they can't keep them forever. Mrs. Baxter loved her sister. And love can make people do desperate things. Mrs. Bantry leaned forward, her voice low. "What's happened since last night? Heard Inspector Craddock took Mrs. Baxter away." "Yes," Miss Marple said. She's with the police now, telling them everything. Clara and Henry are still at the manor, sorting the will. I expect they'll sell it soon. The village will move on, as it always does." Mrs. Bantry sighed. "Poor Clara. She was so cold, but I suppose she was hurting. And Henry, such a temper. You think they suspected Mrs. Baxter?" "I doubt it," Miss Marple said. "They were too caught up in their own quarrels. But the letter worried Clara. It might have exposed her father's cruelty. She's better off now, knowing the truth." As Mrs. Bantry chattered on, Miss Marple's mind wandered to the village. She thought of Billy, the gardener's boy, whose sharp eyes had spotted Mr. Langley's car. Langley had been a loose thread, his grudge against Thornhill real, but unrelated to the murder. He'd come to the manor that night to confront his old rival, only to find him already dead. Billy's notes had helped clear that up, proving the boy's knack for noticing what others missed. Miss Marple made a mental note to send him a tin of biscuits as a thank you. She also thought of Jenny, the chatty maid, whose careless talk about the teacup had set her on the right path. Servants, Miss Marple knew, were the eyes and ears of a house, and Jenny's gossip had been as good as a map. Even Mr. Langley, bitter and brooding, had played his part, his car drawing attention to the manor's secrets. Every piece had mattered, but the teacup had been the center. Its digitalis traces proving what her nose had suspected, that bitter smell in the study. Faint but deadly by noon, Miss Marple decided to take a walk to the village shop, partly to stretch her legs, partly to gauge the village's mood. The shop was buzzing, as always, with Mrs. Weatherby behind the counter and Mrs. Price sorting letters nearby. "Miss Marple," Mrs. Weatherby called, waving a loaf of bread. "You're a hero," they say, catching Mrs. Baxter like that. Miss Marple smiled, picking up a tin of tea. "Oh, I just asked a few questions." The truth came out on its own. Mrs. Price leaned in, her eyes wide. "I heard she poisoned him with his own medicine. In a teacup, of all things." "How did you know?" "It was out of place," Miss Marple said simply. "In a tidy house, one wrong thing stands out." The women nodded, impressed, and Miss Marple left with her tea, her ears catching snippets of chatter. The village was shocked but relieved, the mystery solved before it could fester. She passed the church, where Mr. Clement was sweeping the steps. He waved, his face kind. "Well done, Miss Marple," he said. "You've brought peace back to St. Mary Mead." She thanked him, her heart light. Peace was what she wanted most, not just for the village, but for those caught in the web of Thornhill's secrets. Mrs. Baxter would face justice, but Miss Marple felt a pang of sympathy. Love for her sister had driven her to a terrible act, and that was a story as old as time. Back at Danemead, she found a letter from Raymond, her nephew, slipped under the door. He'd written from London, full of pride. "Aunt Jane, you've done it again. I heard about the Manor case. The teacup was a stroke of genius. If you ever need more digging, I'm your man." Miss Marple smiled, tucking the letter away. Raymond was a good boy, always eager to help. But she preferred her own methods: quiet observation, a keen eye, a knack for the small things as afternoon turned to evening. Miss Marple tended her garden, snipping dead roses and pulling weeds. The village settled into its routine, the Manor's shadow lifting. She heard from Mrs. Bantry that Clara and Henry had reached an agreement on the will, splitting the estate evenly. The Manor would likely be sold, its grand rooms empty of Thornhills. Pride, Mr. Langley, cleared of suspicion, had returned to his shop in Much Benham, his grudge softened by the truth. Even Billy was back to his weeding, whistling as he worked. Miss Marple sat by her fire that night, her knitting needles clicking like a gentle clock. The teacup was back with Mrs. Baxter's things, its secret told. Letter to E had been found in Mrs. Baxter's room, confirming her sister's pain and Thornhill's cruelty. Inspector Craddock had called to thank her, his voice gruff but grateful. "You've got a gift, Miss Marple," he'd said. "We'd have missed that cup." She smiled to herself, her eyes on the flames. Gifts were just practice, she thought, in years of watching people, seeing their habits, their fears, their lies. St. Mary Mead was her classroom, its people her lessons. She thought of a case years ago when a misplaced glove had led her to a thief. Small things always. They were the threads that wove the truth. The village clock struck 9, its chime drifting through her open window. Miss Marple set her knitting down and rose to close the curtains. She paused, looking out at the quiet lane, the cottages dark. Except for a few glowing windows, St. Mary Mead was at peace, its harmony restored, but she knew it wouldn't last. Villages, like people, had their secrets. Secrets had a way of bubbling up. As she turned back to her fire, a flicker of movement caught her Aja shadow passing the vicarage gate, too quick to be clear. She tilted her head, her lips pursing. Nothing, perhaps, or something. She'd keep watch, as always, her sharp eyes ready for the next small thing that didn't belong. In St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple was never truly at rest. Chapter 9. A new whisper. The late summer sun draped St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, softening the edges of the cottages and making the village green shimmer like a painting. It had been a week since the dramatic confrontation at Thornhill Manor, where Miss Jane Marple had unraveled the mystery of Mr. Reginald Thornhill's murder. The teacup laced with digitalis, the letter to E revealing a blackmail scheme. And Mrs. Baxter's tearful confession had settled the village's nerves, restoring its quiet charm. But Miss Marple, sitting in her garden with a cup of tea, and her knitting, knew that peace in St. Mary Mead was like a pond calm on the surface. But always rippling with secrets beneath, she snipped a wilted rose from her bush, her sharp eyes scanning the lane. The village was back to its routine. Children played by the church. Mr. Pye's bakery sent out clouds of warm bread scent, and Mrs. Price bustled to the post office with her usual chatter. Teed's Thornhill Manor stood silent, its gates locked now that Clara and Henry had left for London to finalize the estate's sale. Mrs. Baxter was in custody, awaiting trial, and the Manor's staff, Jenny the maid included, had scattered 2 new jobs. Yet Miss Marple felt a tickle of unease, a sense that one thread of the mystery remained loose. Her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar figure hurrying down the lane. Mrs. Bantry, her friend from Gossington Hall, clutching a straw hat and a basket of plums. "Jane," she called, her cheeks pink with excitement. "You'll never guess what I heard at the shop." Miss Marple smiled, setting her shears down. "Come inside, Dolly. Tea's just brewed." They settled in the parlor, the fire crackling softly despite the warm day. Mrs. Bantry took a sip of tea and leaned forward, her eyes wide. "It's about Jenny, the maid from the manor. She's taken a job in Much Benham, at Mr. Langley's shop, of all places. And Mrs. Price swears she saw Jenny posting a letter yesterday, addressed to someone in London, no name, just initials. E.B., she said. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly. E.B. How curious. Did Mrs. Price see anything else? Only that Jenny looked sneaky, Mrs. Bantry said, biting into a biscuit. Kept checking over her shoulder like she didn't want anyone to notice. And Mr. Langley's been odd, too quiet, not his usual grumpy self. Do you think it's connected to the manor business? Miss Marple's fingers tapped her teacup, her mind turning. E.B. Could be Elizabeth Baxter, Mrs. Baxter's sister, the woman Thornhill had blackmailed. Jenny, young and chatty, had been close to Mrs. Baxter. Had she known more than she let on? And Mr. Langley's shop, where Jenny now worked, tied back to the mysterious car Billy had seen. It was a small thing, but small things Miss Marple knew were never just small. I think I'll take a walk to the shop, she said, rising. A bit of fresh air will do me good. Mrs. Bantry grinned. You're sleuthing again, aren't you? Oh, Jane, you never stop. Miss Marple chuckled, pulling on her coat. Just stretching my legs, Dolly. The village shop was bustling, with Mrs. Weatherby weighing apples and Mrs. Price sorting letters. Miss Marple picked up a tin of biscuits, her ears open. Good morning, Mrs. Price, she said. I heard Jenny's settled in Much Benham. Such a lively girl. Mrs. Price nodded, eager to talk. Oh, yes. She's at Langley's shop, dusting shelves and chattering away. But that letter she posted, Dodd, wasn't it? Addressed to E.B. London. I thought it might be for Mrs. Baxter's sister. What with all that happened? Miss Marple's smile was polite, but her mind was sharp. Perhaps letters can mean so much, can't they? As she left, she decided to visit Much Benham. A bus ride would give her time to think, and Mr. Langley's shop might hold answers. The journey was short, the countryside rolling past in a blur of green fields. Much Benham's market square was busy, with shoppers weaving between stalls. Langley's hardware stood at the corner, signs still faded, but the windows cleaned Jenny's work, no doubt. Inside, the shop smelled of paint and metal, shelves stacked with tools and nails. Jenny stood behind the counter, her curly hair tied back, her face bright until she saw Miss Marple. Oh, Miss Marple, she said, her smile faltering. What brings you here? Just browsing, Miss Marple said, picking up a small trowel. You've settled in nicely, Jenny. Mr. Langley must be pleased. Mr. Langley emerged from the back, his thin face less sour than before. She's a good worker, he said. Gruffly keeps the place tidy. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes scanning the shop. A stack of old ledgers still sat in the corner, dusty as ever. Jenny, she said, Mrs. Price mentioned a letter you posted to be a friend, perhaps. Jenny's cheeks flushed. Just a cousin in London. Nothing special. Miss Marple's voice was gentle. Of course, dear.
Oh.
But you were close to Mrs. Baxter. Did she ever mention her sister Elizabeth? Jenny's hands twisted her apron a little. She said Elizabeth had a hard time years ago, but I don't know much. Mr. Langley coughed, turning away. Miss Marple watched him, noting his sudden stiffness. Mr. Langley, she said, you knew Elizabeth too, didn't? You, from the days you worked with Mr. Thornhill. His eyes darted to her. Long time ago. Why bring it up? No reason, she said lightly. Just tying up loose ends. She bought the trowel and left, her mind buzzing. Jenny's letter and Langley's unease were new threads, faint but real. Had Jenny been helping Mrs. Baxter? Perhaps passing? Messages to Elizabeth? And Langley, his car had been at the manor, his grudge against Thornhill well known. Was he hiding something, too? Back in St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple stopped by the vicarage to drop off a jar of jam for Mrs. Clement. The vicar's wife was pruning roses, her face cheerful. Miss Marple, you're a marvel, she said. The village is calm again, thanks to you. Oh, I heard Clara and Henry are selling the manor to a London couple. It'll be strange without it. Miss Marple nodded. Change comes, even to St. Mary Mead. Have you seen Billy lately? It's been so helpful. Oh, Billy's off weeding for Mr. Pye, Mrs. Clement said. Said he saw that black car again near the manor last night. Empty, though, no driver. Miss Marple's lips pursed. The car again. She thanked Mrs. Clement and walked home, her thoughts swirling. Dane Mead. She found a note from Raymond, her nephew, waiting. Aunt Jane checked on Elizabeth Baxter. She's living quietly in London, married now. No record of trouble since she left Thornhill. But she's been getting letters recently, postmarked Much Benham. Thought you'd want to know. Miss Marple sat by her fire, knitting in hand. The needles clicking softly. The letter to E.B. was likely for Elizabeth, sent by Jenny perhaps at Mrs. Baxter's request. But why? A warning? An apology? Or something else? In Langley's car, still circling the manor, could he be tied to Elizabeth too? She recalled a case years ago. When a servant had passed notes to cover a theft? Jenny was young, easily swayed. Had Mrs. Baxter asked her to keep a secret? The village clock struck 6, and Miss Marple decided to call Inspector Craddock. Inspector, she said, a small matter. Jenny, the maid from Thornhill Manor, has been sending letters to an E.B. in London, likely Mrs. Baxter's sister, and Mr. Langley's car was seen near the manor again. It may be nothing, but... Craddock's voice was warm. Miss Marple, your nothing is always something. I'll look into it. Jenny might know more than she's saying. She thanked him and hung up, her mind at ease. The manor case was closed, but this new whisper Jenny's letter, Langley's car, was a tiny ripple, not a storm. She'd let the police handle it, but she'd keep watching. St. Mary Mead was never truly still. That evening, she joined Mrs. Bantry for tea at Gossington Hall. The talk was light village fates. New roses, the manor's sailbutt, Miss Marple's. Eyes strayed to the window, where the manor's chimneys were just visible. Peace had returned, but her heart stayed alert. She thought of the teacup. Its digitalis traces the key to justice. Small things always. A letter, a car, a glance. They could mean nothing or everything. As she walked home under the stars, the village quiet around her, Miss Marple felt a familiar spark. St. Mary Mead was her home, its people her puzzle. Solved one mystery, but another was always waiting, hidden in the everyday. She smiled, her knitting bag swinging gently, ready for the next small thing to catch her eye.